It's the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Perez coming to you from Baltimore. Londoners have a new mayor, Sadiq Khan. He's the son of a bus driver. He grew up in the inner city in public housing. He became London's first Muslim mayor, fighting off the conservative challenger Zach Goldsmith, who attempted to link him to Muslim extremism. The victory is also a much-needed victory for his opposition Labour Party in the UK, led by Jeremy Corbyn. To address the results and its significance, we are joined by Professor Leo Panitch. He's the author of The Making of Global Capitalism, the Political Economy of American Empire. It won the UK Deutsche Book Prize. Leo Panitch is also the Canada Research Chair in Comparative Political Economy and a Distinguished Research Professor of Political Science at York University. And he has many other books I could mention here as well, but among them is something that's very significant to this interview, and that is the book titled The End of Parliamentary Socialism, From New Left to New Labour, Renewing Socialism, Transforming Democracy, Strategy and Imagination. Thank you so much for joining us, Leo.
Glad to be here with you again, Sharmini.
So, Leo, give us in a nutshell what the results were in the UK and its significance.
Well, Labour, as Corbyn put it, hung on. That is, they had done very well in the 2012 municipal elections, local elections. And after the defeat in the general election last year, and especially after Corbyn's remarkable victory from left as a radical democratic socialist, it became the test that the right-wingers in the Labour Party and almost the whole of the British media, including the so-called left-wing Guardian, which is very anti-Corbyn, as they used to be anti-Tony Benn. The test became first a by-election in winter in Oldham, just a part of Manchester, a working-class area, and then what would happen in the municipal elections. And as with Sanders, the line of the mainstream liberals as well as right-wing social democrats is that a socialist can't win elections. That there may be a few, 100,000 people who watch the real news, but they're a tiny minority in relation to the millions who determine the outcome of politics in a capitalist democracy. And first, the Oldham by-election, which Labour won and increased their majority in, and now in hanging on to the victories they'd held in 2012, and winning London, as you say, one of the largest cities in the world. And I must say the mayor who won it was one of the people who nominated Corbyn for the leadership, although he distanced himself from Corbyn during his election campaign, not wanting to get tarnished by this terrible anti-media campaign. They've done well. They sometimes in a municipal election when there's a Tory government in place, you expect them even to do better. But they've held on to all of their strongholds. And that's not only in the north where the working class is concentrated, the working class vote is concentrated, but also in the south. And that's not only London, but all the way down to Southampton. So it's significant. It means that those who are itching to overthrow Corbyn, just as those who are itching to finally marginalize Sanders, are not going to be able to do so. He's far from winning the 2020 election in Britain, just as Sanders has no chance of getting the nomination, I think, and winning the 2016 election in the States. But what it does show is that there is a very sizable constituency, and arguably a growing one, not only for the radical right in the capitalist democracies, but thank heaven for the radical left.
So, Leo, the rise of the Labour Party and Corbyn as a socialist leader, and with Bernie Sanders here in the United States talking about socialist socialism and democracy. What gave rise to these kinds of movements, both in the UK and the US?
Well, there has been a hollowing out of the mainstream social democracy, which used to argue back in the 50s and 60s, that you could have a humane capitalism. And you saw that the types of reforms that they introduced by the 70s had introduced all kinds of contradictions for capitalism. And as Corbyn, as a young man, and his mentor, Tony Benn, were arguing then inside the Labour Party, you needed to go beyond those reforms to take away the economic power of the big multinational corporations, the banks in the City of London, and so on. And unless you did, they would create the type of crisis for the economy that would undermine the reforms. And that's what happened. And you saw the introduction of neoliberalism. The Labour Party, led by Blair, then got on the bandwagon of Bill Clinton, following the third way, following his accommodation to Reaganism and neoliberalism, doing away with welfare as we know, speaking derisively. This was a Labour leadership of welfare recipients as scroungers, letting the banks really do what they want. Proclaiming that they were not at all disturbed by growing inequality if that inequality would lead people to invest and grow the economy. Through the financial boom it did, especially around London, although the north of England hardly benefited. But with the crisis, you could see the emptiness of this in Britain as in the United States. And moreover, you can see it all over Europe. Part of what is problematic about Sanders is when he's asked, is he a socialist, and he points to Denmark, is that the Danish Social Democrats are suffering in this way too, for having accommodated to neoliberal capitalism. So that's what's producing this. Now, it's not only producing it on the left, it's producing it on the right. And a lot of working class voters are in danger, and in some places are, moving to the very radical right that Trump represents, and that is represented by UKIP in Britain, and Alternative for Deutschland in Germany, and so on. And there's a great danger that if there isn't room for the democratic socialist left to reject global neoliberalism, to offer an alternative to free trade and free capital movements, to talk about democratizing the economy really, so that what's invested where it's invested decided in a democracy, in a democratic planning way, then the great danger is that those working class voters will turn to the right. And we're seeing evidence of that as well. What's important about this election is that Labour has held off the UKIP challenge. They won a few seats, but no councils. And that's very, very important. And that's one of the reasons that we shouldn't allow ourselves to fall in with any of this fear-mongering that a democratic socialist cannot appeal to the mass of working-class voters.
So, Leo,
I think they can, and I think both, yeah.
Leo, in spite of this growing discontent and the gains that are being made both in the UK and by Labour, and the movement behind Bernie Sanders here, while they're significant, they're not making a breakthrough. And this is in spite of the growing inequities and unemployment, as well as, deteriorating environmental conditions. In spite of all of this, it's not making a breakthrough. What is it going to take?
Well, you can't expect, I think, a easy rupture. What is happening, however, is that the ground is being set for a breakthrough in the future. What happened with Corbyn is that some 400,000 people over a matter of months associated themselves with the Labour Party. 100,000 of them were trade unionists. This is unheard of for a social democratic party in half a century. Now, that isn't enough to cause the breakthrough, to bring the breakthrough about, but it's certainly a foundation for it. And with a mobilizing campaign of the type that has been created in Britain around momentum to keep building support in communities. So this isn't just an electoral and parliamentary thing. The prospect would be good if that were to succeed. Similarly, in the States, Sanders is accomplishing what he's accomplishing within the framework of the Democratic Party. Were he actually to have won, which he won't, and try to carry through a socialist program, this would split the Democratic Party, just as the right in the Labour Party is trying to undermine Corbyn. A lot of people who are supporting Sanders will support Clinton because it doesn't matter who's appointed to the Supreme Court. But in doing so, they'll be voting for arguably the most imperial president that we've seen for a long time, with very close ties to the military and so on. She'll be better than Trump. Yes, she'll introduce hopefully some significant domestic support for trade unions and so on. But in the end, either Corbyn will have to transform the Labour Party into a social party, or people who are following him will have to create a new dynamic independent party. And that will have to happen in the States as well. It's harder to see the transformation of the Democratic Party than the Labour Party. But we'll have to see. The big question about Sanders is what foundation is this mobilization going to create for continuing political mobilization and organization?
All right, Leo, I thank you so much for joining us, and we'll have to get you in on a conversation about the Republican Party and Trump in the near future as well.
Would love to do that, Sharmini.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.